afternoon, everyone. I'm Audrey Ronas-Tobin, Director of Marketing at Co-Strategics, and welcome to today's webinar, Data and Analytics Jargon Demystified. We want to make sure that this webinar is conversational, so if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A and we'll try and answer them as we go along. We'll also have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar too. And also, we are recording today's webinar, and yes, we will send you a link when it's posted. And now I'm really excited to introduce you to our speakers, Greg and Nan. Greg Fritz is Vice President of Digital Solutions at Co-Strategics. A technology leader who brings a practical approach to problem solving, Greg thoroughly enjoys the continuous learning process that promotes new ideas and new ways of thinking about solutions. In his spare time, Greg likes to relax in the outdoors and run. Nan Jayaram is the founder and CEO of Co-Strategics. Nan loves to stay on the leading edge of all things related to digital and data. He defines his mission as tapping into the collective curiosity of employees and partners to create new possibilities for clients, communities, and each other. And now, let's get started.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. We'll cover, thank you Audrey. So just a quick glimpse at what we will cover today. Data and analytics is really the context. To do that right, it's a vast world, and so we need to have some kind of a narrowed down context. So we'll cover that context first. That might only take a couple of minutes, but it might seem repeat. These are things that we all know, but inside that, right, we'll go figure out what are the new jargon terms that are emerging that is worthy of our consideration as we move into 2023. And not just new jargon, we'll also cover some known jargon that's becoming important. So these are ideas from the past that are taking or being revisited, right, as we go into 2023. Quick practices, they are strategy and technology consulting. So this is everything to do with where you are, where you want to go, what are your business priorities, and how do you shape that technology consulting, and what does a blueprint look like, solution wise, initiative wise, budget, timeline, all of those things. We kind of bring that together in a variety of workshops. Data and analytics, and that's the second practice. That's the context here today. We also have digital products, platforms, and ongoing services as it relates to data ops, ML ops, and so on, right? So they fall under that. A real quick glimpse at data and engineering analytics practices. If Greg clicks on the next thing, you'll see about 13 or so different things. Platform engineering, developing insights. We're good with Power BI, Tableau, Azure, Snowflake partner, Databricks partner. So a variety of tools in our belt, right? And then based on where customers are, whatever ecosystems there, we can help come in, understand current problems, map out where you are, where you need to go, and elevate over a period of time. And data quality is becoming big, data cataloging, master data management is coming back. And so we'll talk about those things. And there's something called data observability. That's going to become big here as well. So we have slides to cover a couple of those things. So if you go to the next slide, we'll just start with a really quick framework, right, of what the context is. We are, all of us think in these terms: people, process, technology. This is at the center of everything we do within our organization. That is kind of shifting slowly, right? And as we go to next transition here, is data analytics will be at the center, which is people, process, and technology. Right. And so everything that touches people, your processes, your technologies, data is being collected. And so it's not anything dramatically different. It's just saying that data analytics is at the center. If you go to next, there are 7 components or foundation from an analytics standpoint. You have your data analytic assets. You have to access them, integrate them, organize them, and you have to share them, right? So all of that is enabled in the next function, which is data platform engineering. the data pipelines and building the models of business semantic models and orchestrating all of this on the cloud. That's what data platform is about. And once you have these two, right, you are driving value from this data. Now, how do you do that? You're driving insights. That could be your Power BI reports. It could be, KPIs, dashboards that are projected up on the screen, a variety of different ways. There's also self-service where you allow small teams to go build their own insights, all of that, right? So that's all descriptive way, meaning the data is coming through and you want to report. So it creates a set of defensive strategies for you to operate your business, meaning it gives you an insight, a dial, so you can make the best decisions. Advanced model is more around offensive strategy, right? And so writing some of these data science models and driving some of that, that's the other way of activating this data. And finally, also infusing this data insights into other applications or products even, right? And monetizing that. So all of those 3, 4, and 5 is about how you use data to drive outcomes for your business. If you have these 5 things, you almost have to have governance because data is now becoming important. And if you look at a data lake, we'll talk about that concept. A lake is more like a body of water, right? And any water flowing into it may pollute it. So therefore, you need some controls in place. That's what we call data governance. Data quality, catalog, compliance, all these come into play. Finally, if you have all of these, you have to have some life cycle process to kind of make this all right, for the business. As business comes to you and asks for insights, you have a way to take it in, you have a way to process it and deliver the value. So we'll talk about all of the jargons within these 7 blocks. And so that's sort of a thing. So these are the inventory of things. Some of this is starts off a little bit more fundamental assets, metadata. And we'll go on to what's a warehouse, what's a data platform, what's data lake, what's data hub, data mesh, what are some of the differences, and data fabric, governance, what is data literacy. Governance and literacy may be something we know, but they are becoming very important today. Data lineage, data cataloging, what is data observability, and synthetic data as well. So I think synthetic data is repeated, but we cover it. So let's start with data assets. Every organization has data assets. It may be in form of operational data. Every company almost has a CRM system, ERP system, right? Depending on who you are, how you operate. There's a variety of applications. All of those are data assets. You may have timekeeping. You may have cards, right, where you key in, key out. That's a data asset. So there's a lot of open data assets out there on the say you have customers and you can buy customer demographic data, right? And you may buy it from a third party or, there's other open data sets out there. And you can also buy social data. There's also data exchanges, much like an app store on your phone. You can go to those exchanges and buy specific data sets. For example, COVID data sets, right? What is the COVID proliferation in a certain geography region, right? You can buy that and you can integrate that into your own decision making. Dark data is the data that's hidden inside, say, your email account. Only you see it. Nobody else sees it. They may be of value. But we're also not talking about opening up that data, but it's just an example of where data is in a very tight side. So if you have this concept in mind, so nothing new here, right? Everything I've said so far, you may have already processed it, and this may be your life if you're in the data and analytics function. But this is evolving. Metadata has become important. So what is metadata? It just describes the data that you have, right? It improves usability, comprehension, utility, or any functionality of that. This is few different types, right? So if I just see a date that says 2022-03-04, that means nothing, right? But if I qualify that as the order start date, how do I qualify? I tag it. I might say it's a YYMMDD format, which means it's a date field and it's the date on which the order was originated. So now you are essentially adding metadata to that piece. Technical metadata, like I said, data types, operational, like where is it coming from? Business would be cataloging it, domains and tagging it, right? And then social would be if you have a customer and you're buying some external data sets, you're building the profile of the customer. All of that is around how you're enriching it. You're also enriching it more from the way you describe the data. All that falls in the metadata. But the key concept that's now emerging is something called synthetic data. Metadata is very important. Um, the reason it's important is all of the AI ML models need that features and a set of good data to train. And that is hard to find. You can't find training data. It's almost, you could say that these models are limited in their potential because of lack of good data. There may be privacy concerns, or if there is war zone, it's hard to go get data in such zones, right? And so there is a lot of challenges in finding good data, and labeling them means having good metadata around it that you can then use to train your models. So a new field or synthetic data is emerging. It's actually what it is data that is artificially manufactured. And you can use approaches like domain adaptation. So I give you some real data sets. Using the domain adaptation, you can generate a fictitious data set that very closely represents the real data. So think patient data, and it's across a geography, and there's a slew of different chronic diseases that is captured. Domain adaptation gives you an artificial data set that mimics the real data set. But names and everything is fictitious. So the concern around privacy, HIPAA, may be minimized because of that. Gaming engines are being used, domain randomization techniques are being used. So you take the adapted data and you further randomize it. So you get higher resolution. And so you can train your models on that. This is expected to significantly increase AI ML success. Volume is a problem. It's cheaper and faster to do it this way. So there's several startups also that's coming up inside this. So paying attention to synthetic data, right? Anywhere you have problems with activating your AI ML models, this might be a good thing to watch. So if you go to the next slide, what's a data warehouse? So this is a basic concept. It's time tested. It's really a place where you're bringing all your organized data, current and historical data, and you organize it in a very methodical way, just like the picture shows, right? So it's a central repository, and then you take that organized data and you drive insights out of that. So we live this. This is kind of a time-tested concept, continues to have its place. So that's one jargon, but we'll build on this. So as you go further down, right, you're now looking at what we call as the data lake. So so let's start with data platform before we go to data lake. So what is a data platform? Essentially, it's an ecosystem. Ideally, it should be on a cloud, right? Whether you're using Snowflake, AWS, Azure, GCP, right? Those are all ideal places that you can, ideal components upon which you can go build your platform. It includes architecture, it includes pipelines to pull data from one stage here. As you can see here, the internal, external data is being pulled in. And then you have a typical zone 1, 2, 3 type architecture. So you use these data pipelines at the bottom of those boxes to pull data from one stage and push it into another. And these pipelines are like mini workers who wake up at certain times, pull data, do its job, go back to sleep. Or they wake up every 2 seconds or every 5 seconds, depending on what the resolution of data is that you are looking for. Then as it moves through the stages, you can actually consume that, right? So all of this needs to be orchestrated. Where do you do this? It's a set of processes, it's a place, it's computing and storage. It all comes together on a cloud. And the generic term for that is data platform. And sometimes we call it the cloud data platform. And when we go to a particular customer, we might have it as XYZ's cloud data platform, right? And so we usually have abbreviations around that as well. So if you go to the next concept, which is a data lake, this is a picture of a lake. I knew the name of the lake, but I forget what it is now. But basically, it's an aerial view a photography from a satellite. That's a lake. The darker blues represent deeper regions, but you will see that there is also streams feeding this lake towards the right edge of your the picture. What is it? Is essentially a data repository. It's not this organized structured data alone, but it's also unstructured data. Say you have sensors, you have all your transportation vehicles outfit with some kind of tracking devices. They're all sending data in a continuous manner. You can push it all into a data lake. So data lake is essentially a body of water, right? You can't drink it right away. You can't go use your cup, pick it up and drink it. You can, but you will fall sick. This is the same way, organizations can't just go to a data lake, take that water and use it. You will need to process it, filter it, create working data sets, and plumb it all the way into your faucet at your home. It's a very realistic metaphor. So most people say, "Hey, I've completed my pipelines, I have my data lake. Where's the value?" It doesn't show that way. All you have is data in the lake, right? It requires processing. So that's what a data lake is. It's an evolved concept. This is relevant. It's on top of data warehouse because it also brings different types of data into the mix. So if you go to the next slide, there are differences. This is where I let Greg kind of explain some of those differences.
Thank you, Dan. So what I'm going to try to do is now relate some of these concepts, in particular the more technical and architectural things. And then I'm going to start with the data warehouse and the data lake that we just talked about. We love quadrants, and so you have this quadrant here that maps questions against data, and in the lower left you have foundational core data where things are very well known both from a question and data perspective, and it evolves or moves up in the upper right corner, which is really both of those axes are more to the unknown, and it's all about innovation and exploration. So the data warehouse trends towards the known and understood data. It's typically, this is kind of the historical model, if you will, although historical is not many years, but it's generally standardized reporting, structured data for the most part. We have, we know a lot about it. It's where we put our reports, we draw our reports or analytic reports from, but generally because it is structured, there's so much known about it, it tends to be more descriptive and diagnostic in terms of the insights that we gain from it. And because it is very structured, we have a strong central governance. The data warehouse is typically bringing everything together historically, and we'll get to that a little bit more. But because it's all together, we can provide the strong central governance. And therefore, it kind of falls somewhere in this known aspect of data, expanding a little bit up to the unknown aspect, both in data and into the questions. The data lake now says, look, I have more data out there. There's all kinds of data assets out there that aren't necessarily structured, and I don't necessarily want to pull them in to this very structured environment because I want to do AI and ML, and I really just what I want to find here are interesting things about the data and what the data might be telling us that I didn't know before, or I may be discovering new types of data. So this is very unstructured data, bringing it in raw form where the AI can really get at it and start doing models against it. And so what we find here is this tends more toward the predictive and the prescriptive analytics. And because it is looser and we don't necessarily want it so structured, there's a looser governance around it. And so it kind of falls in this kind of upper right quadrant of this diagram. And then, of course, you have some overlap here in the middle of it. And there's nothing, these two things are not, one or the other. They live together to some degree. And a term that people have begun using, and particularly vendors, is calling this overlapping area a data lakehouse. So it's taking the structured and the unstructured and to a degree marrying them together and providing you tools and capabilities to utilize both at the same time. So we're not going to go into data lakehouse a lot here, but I just wanted to kind of bring out that term is because it is an emerging term and maybe not across the industry so much, although you can find plenty of information about it and documentation about it. So then the question is, there's this concept of a data hub, and how does that relate to a data lake? So this is really kind of talking about this to compare these three concepts, the data lake, the data warehouse, and in terms of, the aggregation and distributed data, whether it's the foundation of analytic workloads, whether it's a primary focal point for governance, and whether it is an intermediary for other data consumers. And so data lake and data warehouse, in many regards, for the most part, given these sets of parameters, are basically the general and the same thing. It is bringing things into a central location where governance can be centralized. I have maybe and maybe here because it's not always, especially as we kind of get into some of these other topics we're going to talk about, which a data lake and a data warehouse can be part of, and governance may not necessarily be within that particular data lake. And it is sometimes an intermediary, but most of the time it's more of the central. So the data hub, on the other hand, is very different because it is not a repository, an aggregation for distributed data, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide. It is not a foundation for analytic workloads across the enterprise, but it is a focal point of governance. And again, we're going to talk about each of these things a little more to try to drive it home with some examples. So again, data hub, it's a logical architecture connecting the producers of the data with the consumers. It is federated data management, and that's a key point because it becomes a hub for the points of governance. And it is operationally focused, but it can deliver data to analytic structures, and it's more manageable effectively from the standpoint of it reduces the point-to-point connections of data sources to consumers. It kind of consolidates, much like the hub does, or the warehouse does, but in a different manner. And here's the example. So let's just take a simple example of I've got, some suppliers 1 through N, and I've got some customers 1 through N, right? So the traditional data warehouse data lake is I have those entities and I'm ingesting ETL, ELT, choose your technology, your terminology, and I pull them into this central location. And because I have them in this central location, I can centralize my data governance across my data warehouse, my data lake, probably more so the warehouse and the lake, as we talked about before. What the data hub concept is it says, well, wait a minute, why don't I just create a supplier hub and I create a customer hub and I pull that data into those hubs and I take that data governance and I put it at the hub level, because the concept here is those people who are then going to manage those hubs know that data much better than the people that are at this corporate enterprise-wide governance. And so you now move your governance closer to the people who really know about it. If you talk about any data governance process, one of the trends now is people are saying, involve your business users in your data governance. That's if you have a centralized data governance. Here it's saying your people that own it are the data governance, so they're already involved. So that's the concept here. And then where we go with that is now we have these decentralized data hubs, and I need a way to connect them. So have them talking to one another, and I may also pull into my data lake and my data warehouse. The data theoretically could go the other way too. And that's kind of where the next two topics come from. So I have these data hubs, and the first one we're going to talk about is the data mesh. So let's go back and say, right, I have these data domains or my data hubs. I've genericized them to say domains, and they have data governance and the metadata associated with them at the data hub or data domain level. And in the data mesh, the key concept is, again, it goes back to, I want my data owners, the people who know the data the best, to be close to the data. They then are responsible for creating the data products. So each of these data owners create their data products, and they now have local access for experimentation and whatever else they need with their local data assets. And then what the mesh needs to provide, of course, is this common infrastructure to allow the sharing of these decentralized data domains across the enterprise. And the four key concepts of the data mesh then really become, and this is the key, is it's domain-centric data ownership, right? Put the data ownership with the people who know it best. They build the data products, and they have their instant access, self-service to their data and their data products. And then what we provide is this distributed data governance. Distributed data governance, I want to stress there, because that is the key difference between the next concept, which is the data fabric. The data fabric, you have these same data domains, right? And they have the data governance, and they're all separate. And you bring in this data mesh. And what the data mesh then does is, again, you have to provide this data access layer for all of these data and your enterprise-wide folks to get to the data. But what it does is it takes all this data governance and it centralizes it. So that's the key difference, is data governance and the metadata becomes centralized within the data mesh or somewhere within data mesh. And then you provide these, you utilize tools and utilities, including AI and ML. And the idea is that in an automated fashion, this data fabric and all of these tools can process and learn all of the new, create new metadata, can learn new data sources, can judge whether data from domain 1 versus domain 2 might be used more often, and therefore drive the data governance in a different fashion. This doesn't always have to be automated, but that's where the real value comes in, is because you can then do it much faster using automated processes, and you can grow and expand your data architecture much quicker by centralizing this and using automated techniques to really improve the data governance and the metadata and grow your metadata. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Nan to talk about a few other terms in the jargon.
So as you can see, right, from a data fabric, all of these, from all the way from the platform, these concepts are evolving. And the reason it's evolving is it's important to the business. Data and analytics plays a central role. It's a strategic function. Hence a C-level, there's usually a chief data officer around that. But if you are using all the data assets to drive all these important things, you need to ensure that the data that's being pulled, is trustworthy. It only takes one issue with the data to lose that trust with your business stakeholders, right? They see a report and another report doesn't line up. It's like, I don't know, this is not something I can lean on heavily to make my decisions. That's bad for the enterprise. How do you ensure that? So we see a lot of data governance requirements coming. We actually do this as a specific service to kind of come in, understand where are your data assets, how are they dispersed, who are the rightful owners, can you make them the stewards for those data assets and ensure that the data quality and all the rules around that are upheld. What are the rules? What does that governance committee look like? What does that steward team look like? What should they have from a training standpoint? So anyway, when you put that kind of framework together, you can control the way the data is created, consumed, and ensure that it is being used in a correct way, and that the decisions being made across the enterprise are in line with what the data is telling. Right? You're not using bad data. Essentially not drinking the water right from the lake, but it's has a certain standard, it's filtered, purified, all the minerals are in the right proportion. That's kind of what data governance brings to the table. So if you go to the next slide, data literacy then becomes important. We all know like certain foods are not good for our health, right? Do we, we have data at the fingertips. We have the metrics at the fingertips. Maybe we don't want to make that change. So there is that highest level of organizational inertia, right? That's a whole thing around the culture and how we want to shift and what is it that you're trying to achieve, right? In order to make that change, is that important enough to drive some of these changes? If you say that it is, right, you still need a whole degree of literacy needs from a organization standpoint. You have to give the whole team a base set of terms, right? What we call as the vocabulary. Example, this conversation, right? And then managing that information and giving them a base understanding of how the data flows, what the platform is, and to go back to their teams and ask for the right set of things. And when you do that, there should be a proper set of dialects, like a business glossary. When I say order activation, is it the exact same way? I mean, say order processing. Does the customer support team look at it with the same definition, right? If we all have different definitions of it, the end customer is getting a different experience from each teams. How do you codify all that in your business glossary? What's the catalog? What are the domains, right? So there are, suppliers, there are vendors, and then there is customers. So all of these have domains, and inside of that, there may be specific dialects. So codifying and standardizing that is the second thing. Third one is like looking at the people themselves and saying, hey, what proficiency level do they have? How data minded are they, right? What is that? Are there people who understand data and statistics so well? Can they translate that, right, to the rest of the teams, right? How do you enable a more deeper, more equipped or more capable person to be that steward, right, inside of that mix? So there's a methodical way of going about it. You basically talk to the person, sort of an interview, understand what their role functions are, where the gaps are, and then you can kind of decide what a plan might look like, plan to get them to that level of understanding. A lot of companies are doing this continuous development. They even have universities set up for data analytics. So there may be some required courses everybody goes through within a year, and then there are some advanced courses as well. So essentially, understanding data analytics is not relegated to one set of people or a department. It's like everybody has to think that way, right? And in order to make that change, that's what data literacy is about. We're seeing a lot of interest on this one as well as we work with customers. If you go to the next slide, Greg, there is a concept of data lineage and data catalog. Data catalog is somewhat tied to data literacy. If you have a data on your report, almost always the question is like, where are you getting this data from? Is it coming from the time tracking system? Which one? We have 7 of those. How do I know that this is not in conflict with the way we are reporting on the financials versus, paying the employee, right? Are they all in line with it? So lineage comes to question, meaning what is the trace, right? I have this report and this metric. How does it all tie back? And somebody wants to know that while they're using that, right? So how do you construct that lineage? There are tools to do that. And just as well as the catalog, where you can look at all the sources and what is its purpose, who is using it, how well did it serve their purpose. They can give you a star rating on it. And you could even notate by saying, use this asset for this particular purpose. This is highly trusted. We are using this in marketing, so should other departments, right? So there's also a social component around that piece, right? So Purview is Microsoft Azure's catalog. There's Alation. There's so many other catalogs as well in the market. But finding one, integrating that with your ecosystem, configuring it, making it easily accessible and woven into your day-to-day data analytics work. Those all become important as we go into 2023. The last term is data observability. So this is where you're observing the data, right? And if you go to the next transition here, Greg, basically, there are a lot of things changing. So think about data lake. it just rained and a stream filled some water, right? And there is a river or a stream that's continuously filling it. Maybe there was some polluted water that made its way that came into the mix. So it's a dynamic platform. The nature of data is shifting day by day, minute by minute. And you are piping that, filtering it, and using that to train your data models, right? How do you ensure that your data doesn't go sideways, right? And impacts your reports, your models, and so on. So there is a way that's done today, which is more reactive. When you find a problem, you go fix it and you move on, right? But as organizations rely more on the data assets, you have to become more proactive. So an independent watchdog that continuously watches the changes that's happening and is notifying the respective stakeholders, like, hey, I see this anomaly. Last week we were supposed to get 2 million records. We were short by 10%. Is that a concern? Do you want us to, look at it? Well, wait, the systems are detecting this problem in an automated fashion. And it sends it to you, and then you are saying, yeah, this is a problem, log an issue, I'll send it. And you say, no, I know this is a variation, 10% is not a problem, it's how the business behaves. You might say no, right? And so the system learns from it. But you're observing data coming in, you're observing data being moved across, then you're observing how it's being used. More people using it, less people using it. You're observing what is the cost of all of this. Any of the variations, right, is all being observed and reported on. So this essentially gives you a very reliable, proactive mechanism to ensure your organization is doing the right thing, right, and using it in a proper way. So this is becoming important. I think Gartner also has named this as one of the strategic technology trends, right? Not just in data analytics, across the board, technology trends for the upcoming year. So we also have a product that we are developing around this. So we are super excited around this particular possibility. So those were all the terms that we have so far, right? We picked a few to kind of give you the context and then, elevated based on what new things are emerging. Obviously, we can add another 500 terms to this. So we thought these might be a good starting point. Stay tuned for more of this, but I'll turn this over to Audrey.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Nan and Greg. That was a great information. We are going to, that concludes our webinar for today. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us, to Nan, to Greg, to myself, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.